Here's how you can make an oversized cardigan in just one weekend. Inspired by the English designer J.W. Anderson, this cardigan is super roomy and super comfortable. Last year, Jonathan Anderson shared his pattern, his knitting pattern and crocheting pattern with the world. 72 patches, each patch 14 centimetres by 14 centimetres. Across the front 84 centimetres, same across the back. Body length 60, sleeve length 48. Here's what I changed. I used recycled knits, just like my sweater quilts. My own colour scheme. Would you like your sleeves to be shorter and narrower, or incredibly long, as is the latest fashion? I added some space at the back waist by adding a piece in to give it extra weight. The cardigan is completely lined. Would you like yours to be unlined or lined? What will your design be? Here's what you need. A range of knits, some thread, some scissors, a little bit of ribbon, shoulder pads if you like, dressmaking pins, and some satin silky fabric for the lining. 72 patches for long sleeves or 64 patches for short sleeves. When you're cutting out, make sure that you follow the grain of the knit. I'm sure you understand what I mean. And when you're done cutting out your patches, go back in and trim them up to be exact. I'm going to use the front band of that cardigan. Lay out each section and label it. Here's my version of labeling. And here it is laid out. So this is the front of the cardigan, all laid out. Here's how I make sure I don't pin the wrong bits to the wrong bits. Lay it out together and then pick each piece up, making sure that I put it down right side to right side. 3 pins in it on an angle so they're easy to take out as I'm sewing along. This project goes really fast because there are not a lot of patches in it altogether. Watching this, you can see that I am also using a really big range of knits, from very chunky to quite fine. That lighter green colour is a very fine knit. I'm going to show you how I sew together the front, and then I'm sure you'll be able to apply that information to the sleeves and the back. There, that's the one side of the front. I got this lovely little pocket, all embroidered. I'm going to use it. Sewing the cardigan. Ordinary sewing machine, straight stitch. Get yourself a new needle, one that will be suitable for the large size knits or the heavy knits. Simple stitch forward and back. I don't do any other fishing. I don't do any other finishing. Here's my big rule for working with knits. Knits do not unravel and the seams do not come undone. You see, little reverse stitch, row of straight stitching, little reverse stitch to finish. And as I do so, I'm making sure that the beginning of the knit matches itself and the end of the knit matches itself. Next, we're going to sew these 2 columns together along that line. I'm only going to pin it at the intersection of each square, and I'm trying to get it exactly right and putting 2 thicknesses to one side and 2 thicknesses to the other side. As I'm sewing along, and this is sped up, I go quite slowly to manage the bulk at that intersection. I find that the machine has no trouble in handling that bulk, and that's about as bulky as it gets. And then when I come to the end, I gently maneuver the last 2 patches so that they match each other at the ends of the seams. There it is. 2 sections of the front already done. Here are my fronts completely finished. Haven't sewn in that button band yet. Now let's see, where is the back? It's here somewhere. There it is. You can tell by the way I'm handling it, it's not light, it's quite heavy. And you can see how wide it is across the back. So that's the back all done, and here is a sleeve. So really just a bunch of rectangles. I'm just going to lay out the sleeve against one of the fronts so that you can see how it fits in. There you are, that's the left hand side of the front and the left sleeve. At this stage I've got the long sleeves. Inserting the front band. I've decided my big rule here is to sew in the band with the buttons done up. So that way, when I'm finished sewing, I know that all the buttons and buttonholes match perfectly. Notice I've also kept some of the previous knit as a seam allowance. I can trim that off later. I'm sewing this really slowly so that I can get my stitching in the exact place on the band where it was sewn previously. That way I know my band will be equal width all the way down. Looks good. Now we're going to sew up the other side. As I get to each button, I just move it out of the way. I guess the important stage is when you're pinning it in to have that band done up. And there it is, it's done. Shape the shoulder seams. If you have really square shoulders, you may not want to shape the shoulder seam. But my shoulders are very slopey, so I'm going to do that. I just move my little sticky bits of paper out of the way while I do this. So then I use that piece I cut off as a template for the other shoulders. Notice that the shoulders or the shoulder seam is only 2 of the 3 squares on each of those front panels. The squares adjacent to the front bands actually form part of your neck. Join the front to the back at the shoulders. We pin it together. And I decided to do 2 lots of sewing on this. So first of all, just a straight stitch seam, just like I sew my other knit seams. But then I'm going to take a piece of ribbon and I'm going to sew the ribbon on top of the seam so that that seam won't be stretchy. That will keep the garment nicely together. Otherwise, with the weight of the cardigan, it can get really super stretched out of shape. And there it is. I guess you could do this all at once if you're much more expert than me. But I have to keep checking here to see that I've got it right. And I am actually sewing on top of the previous stitching. That's the shoulder seam done. Nearly. Attach the collar. So just like putting a collar on a t-shirt, we're going to divide the collar into 4, and you can see underneath that I have done some stay stitching on the hem, on the edge of that collar as well, 2 lots in fact, because that knit is incredibly stretchy. So I halve it and pin 1/2 to the centre back, And now I pin 1/4 of it to that shoulder seam and then 1/4 to the other shoulder seam. A lesson I learnt early in my sewing life was you can't have too many pins in something. And then at the centre front, I take a lot of care to make sure that the end of the collar is going to nicely match the bands with the buttons on, so that it sits well. And you can see there I've probably put a little bit of a tacking stitch in place to make sure that happens. Then just take your time and sew on the collar. Because I'm lining this jacket, the hem of the collar is going to be covered by the lining. And there it is, done. Attach the sleeves. Still got those pieces of paper attached. I was just putting this up the right way so you could see they are the sleeves. Then right side to right side, match the center of the sleeve to the shoulder. Sew the sleeves to the body. Nice and simple. I'm sure you can see that you can so do this project in just a weekend. Side seams. There's my side seams already pinned and ready to sew. And there's the seam I'm going to follow. That's done. See how long those sleeves are? They are super long, and there's my little pocket. I've managed to sew it in without sewing over the edge of the pocket. Now I'm looking at the bottom band on the quilt. There's the centre back. So this is where I've decided to add a section to the centre back to add extra length to the back. It's from one of the knits I've already used. So it's in that curved shape because I'm making sure that it matches the side seams, comes back to the normal at the side seams. I've sewn on the bottom band. Are the sleeves too long? For me, the answer was yes. The sleeves pretty much came down to my knees. And do I want a yellow band on my hips? My hips are already quite big enough without any yellow band pointing the way. So I decided to take one row of the squares off each sleeve. You could also just take your whole sleeve undone and make each square smaller. So because I don't want that yellow band on my hips, I'm going to use the yellow knit for my sleeve cuffs. And that works really well. And then have the dark green from the other knit to use as the back band. I very much believe in using the knits and the resources that we have about us. And when you look at it like this, the sleeve looks short, but remember the sleeve is starting quite a way in on the body of the cardigan because it is so wide. Lining and finishing touches, we're nearly there. So I've hand sewn the lining around the bottom of the collar. I've also used machine stitching to sew the shoulders together. And all I did to get my pattern was just to lay out the fabric and work it out. They're just a bunch of big rectangles. I've also sewn the body part to the sleeves using the sewing machine. So now I'm just patting it out and making sure that the grain of the fabric is right, because the lining isn't stretched. And again, this is the technique I use for my sweater quilts. And I want to do everything I can just to give those stretchy knits a bit of support here and there. It will make the whole garment hang much better. But I have erred on the side of generosity with the seam allowances. But not that generous. So I'm going to cut off my seam allowance to match the bottom bands. That's not where I'm going to hand sew it, but if I cut it off to there, it'll still be roomy enough to allow for you stretching. I think they call this rough sewing. And one reason for that is we're kind of inventing the pattern as we go along. So all those safety pins are going to be just a tiny bit of stitching in the end. I cut off the seam allowance where it's a bit bulky at the back, turn in a normal seam allowance and pin it, and then I'm going to do a slip stitch all around the perimeter of the cardigan, so the cuffs, the bottom band and the inside of the fronts. It finishes it off really nicely, makes it a lot warmer, and it looks good. I'm sewing this bit in white thread so that you can see it. Just a few stitches is all that's required. It really doesn't take much. There we are, we're nearly done. I've added another button to the top and another buttonhole to the top of that band. And I've also added another section of band on the bottom of the front band so that it matches the bottom hem. I undid or unraveled some of that yellow knit and got the thread out and used it for a little running stitch inside that collar. There you can see it close up hopefully, just to bring it in a little bit at the back of the neck. Smooth it all out, and there's my little black stitches. I actually think the longest time is spent choosing your knits and deciding what colours you're going to do. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. There we go. See you next time.